Three. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is for you joining us. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and it is an honor to have Paul with us today. Hey, Paul.
Thank you, Reza. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So Paul Turley is a good friend of us from the SQL community. He has been like long time MVP. Like these MVP things you see back behind my wall. This is like probably
Mhm.
half of the things that Paul have in
We
his
can
wall.
wallpaper our walls in blue certificates.
And most of the books you see behind him, this is probably like all of the books that, or part of the books that that he have written. So very good to have you here with us. Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. And I will say that Reza, one of the things that I was concerned about before I joined was I was afraid that my dogs were going to bark in the background, but you beat me to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so we have that in common too. My name is Paul Turley. I live in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, so I'm on Pacific time. It is cold and rainy outside in this late January time, but as Reza said, I've been a member of first the SQL Server Data Platform community and the business intelligence community for a long time. So I'm an old guy. I've been doing this a long time. Data warehousing started out with SQL Server, reporting services, then analysis services, then kind of grew up through the Power BI communities. And I work for a company called Three Cloud Solutions. I was once an independent consultant, much like Reza and Layla, running my own business. But I'm now working for a company, and we everything we do is based on Azure. And a lot of our work is business intelligence and analytics using Power BI and other components of the Azure stack. So over the years, I've co-authored some books and spoken at some conferences and done some training classes, and that's how got to know Reza and other members of the community there. So it's exciting. It's work I
It,
love to do.
it is fantastic to have you here with us, and thank you for the introduction. So it's a good way of starting the conversation. Actually, like you and I, we came from, let's say, some data background, like from SQL side of things, then into the BI, and then into the Power BI. Not everyone comes to Power BI like us. They, like a lot of people, come to Power BI from Excel background. A lot of them might come from finance background, and they all do Power BI in all sorts of way, all different methods, and that is what we are going to talk about today. Like doing Power BI the right way. In your type of work, what category of people you normally deal with when you work with Power BI? Do you mainly work with people who are coming from BI background, or you'll also see other people as well?
Um, you know, varied, but working for a larger consulting company, and coming from an IT-based business intelligence background, I tend to work with enterprise scale clients. And I find that Power BI is a lot of different things to different people, as you've said, Raza. Um, I work with clients and I work with others in the community who are those self-service business data analysts. And where you have one person who has access to some data and they want to understand it, they want to analyze it, but it's very much a solo act. And so I see that a lot. Most of my clients are from a more conventional, more traditional background where, it's an IT shop within an organization, and they may or may not have a data warehouse. They may just have different line of business operational databases, and maybe some traditional reporting capabilities. But two things. One, we want to modernize, and we'll continue to have IT build and deliver reporting solutions and dashboards. But two, we also want to help our users to be more self-sufficient. And I think one of the things that is changing and continues to change in the industry is that the average user isn't just a consumer of data anymore. They're coming out of college and they're learning technical skills. They're learning how to use Excel and Tableau and maybe Power BI and other tools in a self-service mode, but they're not afraid to use a computer like the last generation of users was. So, things are changing, but it's a very broad spectrum.
That's right. So like another topic would be like another, let's say, point to discuss would be, well, like people come from different background, people might have skills, but would that be, let's say, like some of people have a skill, some of people have understanding of how Power BI works in principle, the languages, and they might even know like DAX in a good way. But is that enough to do the Power BI in a right way? How do you define doing Power BI in a right way?
Power BI the right way? Well, it's a journey, and as you know, teaching classes and helping people get skilled up with Power BI. There are a number of different disciplines. How do I connect to source data, transform and shape that data? And the goal of that exercise is to build a data model. And that data model needs to support reporting. So if the end goal is to be able to explore data, navigate it, visualize it so that it makes sense to users, you kind of have to work backward through the process. The visualizations need a data model. In my view, and I think you might largely agree, that a correctly formed data model should be a star schema. It should conform to the kind of the Kimball definition of the star shape with fact tables and dimension tables. But that's not always the case. That's not always necessary. So, if we kind of keep working backward, the source queries provide the shape and the structure for the data model, and that's going to be based on some kind of data source. So what skills do you need? If I just need to be able to explore a set of data, maybe it's data that just exists in a couple of Excel sheets or some text files extracted from a database. I may only need to know how to shape that data and then just to do sums against that so that I can group it and slice it and filter it and visualize it. End of story. I'm done. I've gained business value, and I've used Power BI to kind of enrich my experience, and I don't need to know I don't really need to know DAX, or at least not much DAX. I just need to understand how to shape that data correctly. But as you start moving up that maturity level, and you say, okay, well, I've done that. Well, now I want to do a month to date. I want to do a year over year. I want to look at my percent of variance. So I want to do some calculations. I'm going to have to write some DAX to do that. And maybe I'm going to have to work with a set of data that's a little more rich and trustworthy, which means that I'm either going to have to go to another data source, maybe I'm going to have to shape it by using more complex features in Power Query. Do I need to learn how to write M, in Power Query by hand? Maybe not. But at some level in that journey of maturity, sure, these skills are going to become more and more important.
Great. Thank you for explaining that. We also got a comment from Nico saying and confirming it's a journey. We also have Damu, Danny, Donald, a lot of people on the line in YouTube, which is great. Good to see you all here.
Thank you.
I liked it actually the way that you explained it, because a lot of time I also get kind of these questions that, like, I'm using Power BI. Do I need to have a data warehouse? It's not always, but if you talk with the BI team, well, then probably they would come and say, you might always need a data warehouse. Like it really depends, as you mentioned, Paul, in that explanation, that it really depends what you want to do, what level of maturity it is. It might be just a simple report, or it might build up on top of it. Now, there are situations that we get involved in a project, like myself, and I'm sure you have been in that situation as well. We get involved in a project that somebody built a Power BI solution for over two years, 3 years. They have like tons of like tables, tons of report pages. Like when you look at the Power BI model, it's like huge. Lots of relationships, many bidirectional relationship, a lot of challenges, a lot of heavy DAX expressions. How do you normally like engage in a conversation over there when you want to, let's say, do some performance tuning, make that model better? Because that is a model that is already in like 2-3 years after starting the development, and there are a lot of things to change if you ever need to change it.
Sure. Something that I've learned just in doing BI project work over the years is that, this is an iterative process. And, we use the word journey to suggest that, we're always moving forward. But if you think about the iterative process, and as we spiral, it grows. We add features, we add capabilities, and in every iteration, you're going to try things, and some things are going to work, and some things are not going to work. I'm going through this process with a new client right now this week. I just started working with a new consulting client, and there's been one solo developer there who taught himself Power BI. I said, well, how did you learn? He goes, well, I just Google, and I go to YouTube. And I said, well, who are you finding? And I was pleased to hear, well, I found Reza Rad, and he had some really good videos and training material. And he found Matt Allington, and he found, Marco and Alberto, and so a lot of these people in the community who are trying to teach good and best practices. However, as is normal, a lot of these initial projects tend to evolve into messy projects. And that's normal. That is just the way that this works. The good thing is that as you're iterating, you have the ability to go look at what you've created and say, all right, well, my data source right now is a whole folder full of Excel files that are really extracts from some line of business systems reports. Is that sustainable? Is that scalable going forward? Well, it's met our needs for the past 2 years, and that's great. We've gained some business value, but it would really be good if we could go back to the data source now, because that's a single source of truth. And maybe the company has something like a data warehouse or a data mart that is more reliable. So at some point, you have to be able to let go and say, all right, well, I've created something good. We gained some value. We learned from that. But now it's time to throw that away. And it's time to go back. And it's time to start over again. So you keep the good parts. You throw away the stuff that either isn't relevant anymore or you've learned isn't sustainable. And sometimes when the project has evolved into a state where it's just not maintainable, it's time to step back and start over again.
Very, very important point. Like at certain times, like in few iterations, look back at what you've done. Think about refactoring it. Think about better way of doing it before adding something new to it. It's a really important point and tip for all Power BI development. I found it really useful.
I think a really important point is that starting over again is not failure. Once you've learned from that exercise, that's success. And being in a better position to go back and lay a more solid foundation and build on that, That's part of success. And I think that that's just a different mindset.
That's perfect. Thank you. I've got just a question from Bojan. What is your opinion staying in Excel Power Pivot mode instead of starting on Power BI? Or another question, how do you test that result in Power BI? How do you test that the result in Power BI giving you match the expected value? So reconciliation, basically, if I want to sum it up, and how to choose the right tool. Is Power BI always the answer or not?
Well, Power BI is always the answer.
Yeah, it's
No, it's not. It's not. You know, let's go back to basics. Power BI is a product that Microsoft have used to assemble several technologies that they created. And if you go back in that journey, that started with Excel. In fact, Excel has been a big part of that. If we go back 24 years ago, Microsoft bought a technology from a company called Panorama, which they evolved forward and then eventually created SQL Server Analysis Services. Today, that's the tabular modeling engine. They created SQL Server Integration Services. And the Power Query is not really SSIS, but it is a data transformation tool that was created by the people who architected SSIS. The visualization experience in Power BI evolved out of SQL Server reporting services. So Microsoft have been doing this for a long time. Power BI as a product started, if I'm doing the math right, about 8 years ago as a bunch of extensions in Excel. So we had Power Pivot, and then we had Power View, and then Power Query was added. That's a good story, and I think that if you're let's say a finance person and you eat, sleep, and breathe Microsoft Excel, that is your tool that you use. And the best way to visualize and analyze that data is in a two-dimensional grid, be it a pivot table or just a standard table. Staying in Excel might be a good choice. Now, there's good and bad. Power BI didn't remain in Excel because Excel is a product that gets updated and shipped about every 3 years. And so that's about as often as it can be updated. And relying on a different product team at Microsoft to create a component that needs to be integrated in Excel, that's messy. We've seen in the history of Microsoft, we've seen efforts to take SQL Server and SharePoint and Excel and all of these different tools and cobble them together to try to deliver a solution. And it's hard to get 20,000 people in line and time the release of all these components to release a product. And so it was James Phillips who came in and looked at where Power Pivot and the Power BI brand was at the time, and he said, what, let's create a streamlined product. We'll make Power BI Desktop. We'll incorporate the tabular modeling engine, Power Pivot. We'll evolve Power View forward using HTML5. Long story short, Power BI Desktop gets updated every month. The service gets updated every week. And if you want to benefit from that kind of innovation and that kind of just rapid response to the industry, Power BI is the place to be, not Excel. So good and bad. I'm not going to say always use one over the other. I think there are pros and cons, but Power BI is definitely a much more streamlined experience.
Thank you. It was a very good explanation. Yes, I still have clients who are using Excel, and there is nothing wrong about it, as Paul mentioned, because the requirement is in that way. But also a lot of much more clients using Power BI because they are looking for some features, for some updated things, for some better visualization and things like that, which requires Power BI. So definitely it's not an answer for everyone. It depends. As all we say every time.
It always depends. That's the consultant's answer.
Thank you. And the other question, how do you validate the result of your Power BI calculation, Power BI data model? How do you go through this validating process normally?
I'm glad you asked. I have a blog post on that. Can I share my screen, Reza?
Oh, yep, I'll switch you to your screen sharing.
All right, let me know
Here
where
you go. Yep.
when that's up. Okay. This is a big question, and prior to a couple of years ago, I would have said, well, you build your ETL process or your Power Queries, and you populate a data model, and then you build some measures, then you visualize it, and then you take those results and you get those numbers, then you go run some SQL queries, if that's your data source, and you compare the results. But I did some work. This is a blog post series, which I think kind of prompted this discussion, Reza, doing Power BI the right way. And I have a post here, number 6, validating data model results. And I'll just walk through some of the points that I make. For me, blogging is a way for me to get chaotic ideas out of my head and put them into a concrete form. And that's often why I blog, because I just, I got this idea and I had this great experience. I want to share it. So I write blog posts for that reason. Number one, when you're building a data model, one of the first things that I do is I create some really simple count measures. So it's easy to count the rows in different tables. So, and I call this validation 101. If I want to be able to validate that my data model is returning reliable results, if I go back to, let's say, my source database, and I know that I have, 50 million and 4 sales records, if my data model tells me that I have 50 million and 4 sales records, well, that's a good litmus test that at least all the data is getting in there. So that's a good place to start. The next thing that I do is as we create more complex models, sometimes it's not as simple as saying, oh, I just want the sum of a sales amount, or I want the average of the quantity of products purchased, by a region or whatnot. So we end up building these measures on top of each other and create these dependency chains. And there are some great tools that can help us kind of unwind some of the complexity that we might create in more complex data models. Reza, your tool is extremely helpful. And you've got some great features in Power BI Helper to help with that.
Thank you.
We also have I mean that sincerely. We also have tools like Tabular Editor from Daniel Oettinger, who can help us go beyond some of the streamlined capabilities of Power BI Desktop to be able to explain why we get a number that we get. As report requirements get more complicated, we end up kind of compounding complexity. And when a user says, hey, why does that say this? I go to this report that got spit out of our ERP system, and then I compare it to the Power BI report, and there's a 3% difference. Defend that. Why is it different? And I think that using tools to understand and document those dependency chains can be helpful. Here's a screenshot of the tabular editor dependencies between different measures. And then finally, I have created data models that, aside from the production report model, I will create a simple data model that goes and runs a DAX query against that model and gets results. And then I'll go back to a data source and get those results so that I can compare them side by side. And that's detailed in this blog post where I talk about creating a validation project so that you can do kind of apples to apples comparisons between different data sources. There we go. Now my dogs are barking over.
Now we are even.
Anyway, so that was kind of a long answer to a short question, but
No, that was fantastic.
you can kind of dig deep, but just start with simple things like row counts. That's a good place to start.
Great, thank you. If you can stop sharing your screen, we'll get back
Sharing
to
as soon as I can find my Teams client. Yes.
Great. So thank you for that answer. I think it is also a good time to after talking about uh, validating the model. Oh, by the way, I should mention this as well. Paul has a really nice series of doing radical. I told radical so many times, doing Power BI the
It's always
right
about
way.
the brand.
Doing Power
You've
BI
got some
the
great
right
stuff
way.
on Radicat as well, but go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, doing Power BI the right way. It's definitely worth checking out. It's all available in his blog, and the blog links is already in under his video feed over here. Go and check it out. It's fantastic series about doing Power BI the right way. So we talked about, let's say, validating the model. There are points that we need to separate the model from visualization. What is normally that point? Should we always do that, or we do it at a certain time? What are normal requirements and reasons to do that?
I won't share my screen for this, but I did a blog post on this specific topic, planning for separation. And the point that I make is that if you're in self-service mode, so let's go back to, I'm playing the role of that business-focused data analyst. Power BI Desktop is such a convenient tool because, I go connect to a data source and I import the data, I shape it, I build this data model, I create some measures, I visualize, boom. It's just such a simple process. And in the past, we've used similar tools to do the same thing, but it took weeks and months to do what a person can literally do in a day using Power BI Desktop. But the simplicity comes at a cost, and that is that here I am. I'm one person, and I've done all this. Let's say I publish that out to a workspace and I share it with some coworkers and colleagues, and that's it's great. Hey, Paul, can you go add this other feature? Can you incorporate this other data? And I said, well, yeah, but I'm heading out on vacation, with my wife, and so I'm not going to have time to add all of these features. It'd be great for another developer to be able to step in and take over all or some of my work. So one, I should be storing my files where they can be managed and versioned, perhaps. And the simple answer there is I could just put them in a business shared OneDrive for Business folder, which is SharePoint or Teams, and then I can version those files. And the second thing is that if we separate the data model from the report, I can create multiple reports. Different developers can create their own reports that use my published data set as a single data source. Now, in the past, I would say, well, that's going to be more time consuming. It's more complicated because every time I make a change, let's say I add a measure to the data model, now I have to publish that data model and I have to refresh the data. That takes time, and then you have to go connect to it and then add a visual in a report. Steve Campbell with Power BI Tips created a great extension that lets you connect your what we call a thin or a connected report, but it's a thin report that doesn't have a data model in it, to a local desktop copy of your data model. And so you can hot swap between the local copy or the published copy that's out in a workspace, which makes that process a lot faster and easier to manage. It's a tool that I've started using in a lot of my projects.
That's a great one, definitely.
Yeah.
And definitely great points mentioning about what are situations to split your files, because we always start with one single Power BI file, then gradually things add to it, requirements changes, there are points of time that we need to split it.
And
like,
and I'll just
yep.
one more comment on that. If you wait too long, let's say you've built a lot of report pages with drill through and tooltips and bookmarks, and then you think, I really ought to split my data model from my reports. That's going to be more painful after you've worked through all of that visualization design. So, plan ahead. It can be done, but I guess Casper de Jonge had a blog post early last year where he essentially showed you how to go recreate new report pages and copy and paste the visuals. Then you have to wire up all the bookmarks and all the drill through. And anyway, plan ahead is my point.
That's great. Thank you. Couple of questions we got here. One is about more like graphics and design features in Power BI. So Power BI, I mean, it's good at visualization, but there are not that many graphic features around it. Like if you want to really design a user experience different, I mean, you have to spend time getting the bookmarks and things like that, right? What are normally things you do to have a better graphic design in a report? What are resources you recommend? It's not that much of doing, let's say, Power BI modeling the right way. It's more about the front end of it.
I think that this question has been asked, for many, many years, even prior to Power BI. Back when SQL Server Reporting Services was the tool that I used most of the time. I would see application developers, maybe somebody who spends their time, using C# code or JavaScript code to create websites, and they would think, oh, well, reporting services is this programmable interface. It has properties and there's an API and I should be able to use it as an extension of my programming experience. And then they would just have a really horrible experience trying to program everything in reporting services. Same thing with Power BI. There's an API, there are automation capabilities, but you really need to understand the purpose of the tool that you've decided to use. Power BI is not a tool that was primarily created to enable application developers to extend their custom applications. So first of all, figure out if it's the right tool for you to use. Maybe it's not. If you need to go create a custom website with a chart on it, you can get chart components that could consume a Power BI data set or an analysis services database, perhaps, and make that an extension of your BI solution delivery. One of the things that you can do with Power BI to use it in a more kind of app-centric approach is to use the Power BI embedding service. And so you can truly integrate Power BI visuals, dashboards, report pages with all of these rich features by using the embedded service rather than trying to use like URL parameters or treat Power BI as part of your app dev experience. So
great.
Use tools the way that they're designed to be used, and don't just go get a bigger hammer if it's not working.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you. So talking about like this brings us to the point of like after development, the delivery options we have for Power BI. Well, of course, we have like Power BI report, we have the dashboard, we have paginated reports. Which type we need? Do we need it all, or like what situations you would choose which, and then how do you share this content with others? So this is also, I've seen it in your like series of doing Power BI in the right way. So what are your recommendations on these?
On using different types of reports?
Yeah, like when do you choose, let's say, a Power BI report versus, let's say, a paginated report? Like
so Reza, if you're going to ask me hard questions, I'm going to make you answer them first. So what and I very seriously. So what do you think the decision criteria really is at a high level between a Power BI report and a paginated report? I know that you and I have talked about that for many years in the past.
Yeah, I would say like when I talk with it's an interesting story actually. Like when a client comes to me, first they say, "Well, I want this fantastic visualization, things like that." We'll go and let's say go through discussion of creating Power BI report. We'll go and build it, either us or like they go ahead and create that fantastic like dashboard of Power BI visualization. But then they say, "Well, this is good, but I want to actually see the exact numbers. I want to see these. I want to have it printed for my, let's say, users. Like some of them, they need like these daily and seeing like how this is compared to yesterday, something like that, having it printed. So then it comes with like other requirements. From the user point of view, these are all like the same. I want the report, but in fact we are talking about like two different types. Let's say more like a analytical report versus something more like a static report, which will look at it in a grid view and things like that. So from my point of view, this is where I make that separation. What is your thinking?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I think that this kind of falls into the category of some things in life are hard, though we would like them to be otherwise. SQL Server reporting services, which we now call paginated reports, as it's integrated into the Power BI service, it began its evolution way back in 2002, 2003. And the technology that it's based upon was, HTML, web services, XML. It's a great tool, but it's an old tool, and it's been on a certain trajectory for a very long time. It was also designed to be what we would call a part of a box product, to be installed on your report server, in your environment, on-prem, back before, anyone even knew what the cloud was. Power BI, the Power BI service, was designed to be a cloud service product. So you get two different tools that do different things. They have different stories. They've been matched together now. So if you have a Power BI premium capacity, you have the ability to design and deploy paginated reports and put them in the Power BI service. Do they work closely together? Yeah, in some ways they do. And we can do things like you could create a dashboard style interactive Power BI report and then create a drillable measure. So you can create essentially a URL that lets you navigate to a paginated report, passing some parameters. Is that a perfect experience? No, but we can do some creative things and make that happen. I think that so we could say that if you need to have interactive, highly visual reports, Power BI is probably the better choice. If you need more conventional, detailed operational reports, paginated reports are probably a better choice. There's a lot of overlap between the two tools, though. It's hard to say, well, you can't do that with Power BI, or you can't do that with paginated reports. There's a lot of overlap there. So that's the first delineation. I think that it's important to understand in all of that once you make a choice to use a certain type of reporting tool, it's going to be hard to leverage that work if you change your mind. So again, understand the capabilities and limitations of the tool that you've chosen to use and work within those boundaries. And when you start stepping outside, I have a customer who they've taken all their Power BI reports and they've decided to make them really, really tall so they can scroll down. And they're trying to create operational reports with Power BI. One of the first things that I did, I came in, I said, you guys are not using the right tool. You're trying to make Power BI behave like reporting services. Go use paginated reports for this. So, you need to realize when you're treading the limits of a tool.
Great, thank you. I've also get a message here from Andre saying that is why he loves the report server ability to generate custom subscriptions. data-driven subscription and things like that, which is fantastic. Yeah, that is also another thing, but definitely exactly as you mentioned, Paul, that you should find what is the right fit for you for that requirement. One tool cannot answer it all, and it also goes back to the previous point we had, which is separation of the data set and the visualization. Because if you have now, let's say, your data set separated, you can have paginated report on top of it, you can have like let's say Power BI normal report on top of it, and you can integrate these in a nice way with a little bit of challenge, but let's say it is still possible. So if
I had a longtime friend, a colleague that I actually haven't spoken with for years, commented on my blog, and I responded to it last night. And he was asking about paginated reports and Power BI, and he was particularly a little miffed, shall we say, or unhappy, coming to the realization that you can't get a lot of the same rich features from Power BI reports when you use Power BI Report Server. And, you know, I see a lot of people are saying, well, you know, we've made the decision not to go to the cloud. For whatever reason, our company either can't or has decided not to go to the cloud. Why can't Microsoft just give us all the same capabilities and features, you know, on-prem that they do in the cloud? And, you know, we could spend a lot of time talking about why that's happening. But I think the more important point is that is reality. Microsoft is cloud first. It is easier, it is more cost effective, it is part of their business strategy to deliver the best features to the cloud. And after they've done that, if some of those capabilities can be moved to the box product, aka Power BI Report Server, then in time that may happen. But, you know, back to life is hard, suck it up and accept it, rather than, you know, complaining about, you know, what you think should be happening. I mean, you know, Microsoft is doing some fantastic things, but they're doing them in the cloud.
Yeah, that is definitely correct. Like it is what it is. Like these tools are what we got. They would be definitely better in the future. In a year, in 2 years, they would be like much better. They would have much more features in it. But you should consider, like, with the existing tools, with the existing features, how you are going to combine it, how you are going to use it. Like one of the things, like you mentioned it earlier as well, but I would like to expand it a little bit because we had a question from one of the attendees here that like in Power BI development or modeling, or basically we use some third-party tools. You mentioned DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, Power BI Helper, or any other tools. Now, our audience might not know exactly what these tools are used for. Can you just like little explain, like in a Power BI, let's say, project, normally why we use like each of these tools and how they can help?
Absolutely. You know, Microsoft, I think, uniquely have leveraged both their partner community and you know the community at large. And if you've been in this space a long time, you know that the word community has a very special meaning, and it really means that we have people who want to help. You know, we believe that if I get stuck, I can reach out to Reza and say, hey, Reza, I need some help with something. There's no, we're not writing up a contract and we're not agreeing to exchange money. We're going to help each other out. And there's that feeling in the community where at a certain level, we support each other for free. Now, at some point I have to pay my mortgage. And so I have a job and you run a company, and that's important as well. But out of that community have evolved a number of great tools. And Microsoft, I think, and when I talk about Microsoft, I'm specifically talking about the Power BI product team, have come to rely on the creation of those tools. So you have folks like, Darren Gosbell, who created Dex Studio, and I talked about Daniel Oettinger creating Tabular Editor, and a number of other individuals now have created some great free-to-use tools. Now, at a certain point, a version of these tools might require a subscription, and but rather than the product team putting all of their resources into extending SQL Server Management Studio and Power BI Desktop and other tools that Microsoft develops to be able to provide and enable all of the features of Power BI, they're relying on the community to make that happen. And particularly for enterprise scale BI, Power BI Desktop is not going to have integrated version control. It's not going to have integration with Azure DevOps. That's not the purpose of that tool. And quite honestly, Microsoft is not investing because the community has stepped forward and they're doing that. If you want a version of Power BI, data model, convert it to a model.bim file and manage it with Tabular Editor. It works great. So, get to know these tools. But if you're that self-service, business data analyst, you don't have to use all of these different tools. But if you're in the enterprise space, there are a handful of tools that are important to know.
Thank you. Yep. Gradually you build up starting using these tools from like a simple Power BI report. You might not need it, and gradually you get to use them like fantastic tools, definitely, as you mentioned. So talking about like this environment, like this probably is going to be like one of the last things we are going to discuss. This environment that we have like multi-developers. So let's say we start Power BI with one single report, gradually it builds up, gradually we might have a team of developers working on this. Like, what are your recommendations for situations that development would become like a team development in Power BI? So you mentioned already like separation of report and data model. That's one of the things. Like, what are other things you think would be helpful in that situation?
Well, you in import mode, if you have a lot of data in your data source, the PBIX file that you use to manage your data model is going to get pretty big. And so we've already talked about separating the reports from the data model, okay? But once we've done that, what I don't want to do is go, import millions of fact rows and inflate my PBIX file to, 800 megabytes in size, and then try to check that into a source code repository. That's not a good idea. So you can use parameters, you can use the incremental refresh feature to get that file down to a manageable size to manage on your desktop. Then when you deploy it out to the service, you can change the parameter values or use incremental refresh, and then it'll inflate the data model with all of the data that you need. If you keep those files small enough, you can use a source code tool. So you could use Azure DevOps, or you could use TFS, or a number of other tools. That can already be done with report files very easily. Don't ever try to branch and merge these files. The Power BI desktop file, and we all tried for years. We tried to peel these things apart, and there've been a lot of little cottage projects to try to do that, and most of them just failed miserably. So don't do that. But one of the tools that actually can be used to do schema compare and merging and branching is a tool developed by a good friend of ours who actually wasn't with Microsoft at the time and now is a lead on the Power BI engine team. Christian Wade created the ALN toolkit, which back in the day was called BISM Normalizer. So that's a great tool that you can use to say, oh, well, I added a relationship over here, and I added some measures in this copy of my data model. I can merge those together and, carefully, merge things into a new version of a file. That's a lot harder to do, if not impossible, with reports. So, again, understand the limits of the tools. I see that typically it's application developers who promote a very rigid application lifecycle management methodology and don't force BI into a pure DevOps environment. You need to understand that BI is different. It's not just that the tool's different or the file structure is different. It's just that the characteristics of BI are very iterative. And in order to separate work so that I can have multiple developers working, I need to be very deliberate about saying, hey, Reza, I've checked in the copy of this data model. You can do your data model work now, since you live in a different time zone and I'm going to go to sleep now. You can work on it, then you check it in, then I'll take it over. It's difficult for us to work on our own copies and merge them together.
Great points. Thank you.
It's all possible, and Microsoft are making great strides to give us true DevOps, continuous integration by using deployment pipelines in the Power BI service, a premium feature, and that eventually is supposed to be integrated with Azure DevOps. So we're moving in that direction.
Yep. Fingers crossed. getting to that stage.
It's a journey.
Yes. Like one final thing, and then we wrap up. How data flow plays a role in this, let's say, whole thing. Like separating data model definitely helps, making sure that the size is not like super big so that it's manageable. What are situations you would use data flow? And that is a big topic itself, but like if you want to wrap it in.
It is a huge topic. Let me share my screen again, please.
Yeah.
And I will present a PowerPoint slide. So I just did a post on using data flows, and I have to admit that I have worked with data flows some. And I really kind of started out using data flows for projects that didn't demand them. And so I've kind of stepped back away from using data flows. But now I'm really I'm getting a better understanding of where it's appropriate to use data flows. So at a high level, these are my thoughts about where data flows fit. If you are in that self-service mode that I've been talking about, you're going to use Power Query to do your data sourcing and transformations, and you probably don't need to use data flows. If you have a true data warehouse over here on the orange side of this gauge, you can just point to a table or point to a view, import that data, or use direct query to point to certain tables in a composite model, and you don't need data flows. Data flows really fit in the middle. So, kind of really quickly, here's self-service mode. Power Query is a big part of this equation, and it's a very simple kind of thing. There's the modern data warehouse. I'm doing my data prep here using a data lake, using Azure Data Factory, and perhaps using Synapse Analytics or Azure Data Warehouse. Here's the Synapse Analytics version where I have some other more scalable components, but it's the same data model. Data flows is for that sweet spot in the middle. So data flows can be used to create kind of a mid-scale data warehouse where I define entities, I create queries, I do a lot of my transformations using shared and published queries out in the service in a workspace, and it kind of fills that need, that gap in the middle. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you. That was fantastic explanation. If you can stop sharing your screen, we'll get back to presenters mode. Great, awesome, thank you. That was fantastic explanation. With one last question, I think we wrap this up. Do you think separating, this is from Damu, do you think separating workspaces from each other is a good idea?
Separating workspaces from each other. Big question. There are a lot of what ifs. Uh, boy, I think that this could probably be more of a conversation than trying to answer one question. You absolutely should use workspaces very deliberately to separate user access, to separate, in some cases, data sets from reports. Let's say that I'm building a data model that's going to serve up reports for different business areas, sales, finance, inventory. These are different groups of users with different needs, but I'm going to create one data model to serve up all of that reporting capability. I would probably put that, I'm using the word data model and data set interchangeably. I would deploy that data model out to a data set in a separate workspace that I can manage. And then I would build my reports and put them in separate workspaces that I then convert to apps. And then I use the apps to share with users. As we're thinking about managing our release management, if for each of those business areas, I would have a dev workspace, maybe a QA workspace. It depends, because sometimes we combine dev and QA, but definitely a separate production workspace that gets converted to an app. And then I can selectively decide how I update that app with new features. And then that's how I deliver reports. So we definitely want to use workspaces to separate those things.
Great point. I also have a recent blog about what are some of the reasons you might separate workspaces and how do you separate it? Like these points that you mentioned, Paul, are among those, as well as like you might separate it based on the audience group, you might separate it based on your data flow, you might separate it based on your dev, UAT production environment. So there can be actually like many reasons to separate it. It's all depends. Again, at the end we get to the same answer.
Yeah,
awesome, fantastic.
Don't over-engineer it. Make it too complicated by putting, separating everything. But then again, you have to find the right fit, and you're right. It depends.
Exactly. Great, awesome. Thank you for your time. Anything else you would like to mention in this last 3 minutes?
No, other than Reza, I just wanted to thank you for your contribution to the community. You're one of those go-to people, one of the data gods that I look to when I have questions and I need help. And I would just encourage others to continue to do that as well.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's an honor to have you here with us. I always look up to your books and blogs and presentation. They are always
likewise.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone joining us. This recording will be available in YouTube in the same channel. Of
all right.
course.
Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day and stay safe.
Thank you again, Raza. Take care. Good day to you.